There's a kind of shame most people never put into words. It's not the sting of being caught doing something wrong. It's the dull, heavy ache of doing nothing at all. It creeps in quietly, in the still moments between distractions. At a red light. In the shower. When you're lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. That whisper. You could have done more today, you should have done more. But this shame isn't about laziness. Laziness is a surface symptom. This is deeper. This is the pain of breaking a promise to yourself, over and over again. You said you'd start today. You believed it. For an hour, maybe two. But then the day unfolded, and the person who made that vow was replaced. Replaced by the same tired face, the same endless scroll, the same pattern of hiding from what matters most. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." What if that's exactly what's happening when you avoid discipline? What if your skipped routines, your delayed goals, your unfinished plans aren't signs of a weak will, but signs that you avoiding a deeper confrontation, the one with the person you were meant to become? Because here's the truth. That version of you who's tired, distracted, inconsistent, that's not the real you. That's the self you've rehearsed. You've repeated it for so long, it's become your mask. And just like any role you've learned, it can be unlearned. Imagine this. Tomorrow morning, you wake up. But instead of defaulting to the same patterns, you step into a different script, a different identity, not forcing yourself to try harder, but embodying someone who no longer needs to try, because it's simply who they are. And that's where we begin. Because if you can rehearse being undisciplined, you can rehearse being unstoppable. You've been taught to think that discipline is about effort, that if you could just push harder, grind longer, and force yourself to work through the resistance, you'd finally become the person you admire. But Carl Jung would tell you something very different. Discipline isn't effort. Discipline is identity. And you will never become disciplined until you stop identifying as someone who needs to become it. As long as discipline is something you're chasing, it will always remain just out of reach. Because deep down, the mind always returns to the man it believes you are. Most people never see this. They stay trapped in an endless loop of self-improvement, switching jobs, changing environments, trying new systems, binging motivation videos, thinking the missing piece is something external. But the truth is, you don't need more. You need less. Less escape, less noise, less running from the one thing you've avoided your entire life. Responsibility. Not responsibility to your boss, your parents, or the expectations of the world. Responsibility to your becoming. Responsibility to the sacred contract between who you are now and who you were meant to be. This is where discipline lives, not in checklists or 5 a.m. alarms, but in devotion. Think about it. The moments when you felt most alive weren't when you were chasing pleasure or collapsing into rest. They were the moments when you were aligned, when you kept your word to yourself, when you surprised yourself by doing what you once thought you couldn't. That feeling wasn't just pride, it was integrity. And Jung would tell you that's not a coincidence. The psyche longs for unity. It longs to integrate. The more fragmented you become, saying one thing, doing another, the more your subconscious will rebel. You will feel resistance, not because you're lazy, but because your mind is rejecting the fraud of who you're pretending to be. Lack of discipline isn't the disease, it's the symptom. The real problem is a split self, two versions of you in constant conflict. One side of you makes promises, sets goals, dreams of building something lasting. The other side breaks those promises, drifts toward comfort, and disappears into distraction. One part of you is the builder, the other is the escape artist. And every time you cycle through that battle, every time you commit and then retreat, you aren't just wasting time. You're deepening the fracture inside yourself. Carl Jung warned us, what you resist persists. The parts of you that you exile don't vanish, they wait. They become part of your shadow, not only the dark, destructive aspects you've tried to hide, but also the strongest, most disciplined parts of yourself. That's right, the committed, powerful, focused version of you you've been longing to become may already be in your shadow, locked away, not because you're weak, but because you're afraid of what will happen if you unleash it. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes you're not afraid of failure at all. You're afraid of your own strength. Because if you ever truly stepped into that version of yourself, if you ever followed through completely, you'd lose all your excuses. You couldn't hide behind potential anymore. You'd have to become proof. And that's terrifying, because proof is public. Once you become the man who keeps his word, the world will see you rising or see you falling. But here's the part most people miss. You're already falling. Every time you hit snooze, scroll past your priorities, and settle for cheap dopamine over earned respect, you're already in decline. The fatigue you feel isn't from working too hard. It's from the guilt of knowing you've been running from who you were meant to be. You didn't become undisciplined by accident. No one wakes up one day and suddenly loses their ability to follow through. It happens slowly, over years, through 1,000 small betrayals, some from the world around you, and some from yourself. At some point, you began to internalize a story about who you are. Maybe it was subtle, maybe it was brutal, but it became a quiet identity. You're someone who almost does it, someone who nearly changes, someone with potential that never fully arrives. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That false identity, that survival mask, isn't the real you. It's a role you learn to play, crafted from fear, rejection, and abandonment. And the moment you confuse that role for your identity, you begin living out the same script over and over again. You think you're procrastinating, but you're really protecting yourself from the sting of a memory you've been trying to forget. Ask yourself, when was the first time discipline was punished in you? Maybe you spoke up and were silenced. Maybe you worked hard on something only to be mocked. Maybe you built something small and proud, and someone tore it down like it meant nothing. That's how the fracture begins. Not from laziness, but from pain. And the disciplined part of you, the one who wants structure, control, focus, is also the most vulnerable part, because discipline requires belief. It requires faith in your own power. When that faith is shattered early, discipline retreats. This is what Jung called the repression of the noble archetype, the king, the warrior, the architect of order. The part of your psyche that wants to lead, build, and master time and energy. It's still there, but it's been exiled, pushed into the shadows. So now, every time you try to start something, a new habit, a morning routine, a focused project, you're not starting from zero. You're walking into a battlefield full of ghosts whispering, "You'll never finish. You've never been that person. Why bother?" And unless you learn to confront those ghosts, you'll keep proving them right. Here's the truth most people miss. Your failures are rarely about effort. They're about identity. You cannot outwork a self-image that contradicts the very thing you're trying to become. You will always drift back to the man you believe you are, no matter how many systems, tools, or bursts of motivation you throw at the problem. That's why change that relies on willpower alone always collapses. It's why a new routine feels strong for a week and then crumbles. You trying to stack new behavior on top of an old identity, and the foundation can't hold it. The shift begins when you stop trying to kill the lazy part of yourself and start reclaiming him. That part of you isn't here to ruin your life. He's here to protect you from pain, from the sting of disappointment, from the humiliation of trying and failing again. He remembers the moments when effort hurt you, when discipline was punished, and he's been guarding you ever since. Jung would say he's in exile, but he's still you, and he needs to be brought home. When you do this, when you stop seeing discipline as a war and start seeing it as a return, everything changes. You stop chasing permission from the world. You stop performing for approval. You begin to organize your life, not to impress others, but to reflect the inner order you've restored. That's what real discipline is, psychological architecture. It's the external reflection of internal sovereignty. Without it, you don't just lose productivity, you lose identity. And when a man loses identity, he loses the will to rise. Discipline is more than a habit. It's more than a set of rules or a calendar full of check marks. At its core, discipline is architecture, the building of an internal structure strong enough to shape the world around you. Without it, life begins to decay. It starts quietly, a skipped task here, a delayed decision there. But over time, the lack of structure erodes more than your productivity. It eats away at your sense of self. That's why an undisciplined man feels shame even when no one is watching. It's not about the task he didn't finish. It's about the person he's afraid he's becoming. Jung understood that the fractured self is a haunted place. When you abandon parts of yourself, when you exile the builder, the warrior, the guide, you create an internal vacuum that nothing external can fill. That's why motivation fades so quickly. That's why the latest self-help system can't keep you moving. You not struggling because you lack strategy. You struggling because your inner house is in disorder. And until you restore it, the walls will keep crumbling no matter how often you rebuild. But when you integrate those lost archetypes, something powerful happens. The external begins to match the internal. You no longer fight your own reflection, you align with it. Discipline stops feeling like a battle you wage every morning and starts feeling like the natural rhythm of your life. You wake up and act, not because you're forcing yourself, but because this is simply who you are now. This is the architecture you've built. And like any well-designed structure, it holds even when the storms come. Time is not just something you move through. It is something you in a constant relationship with. And like any relationship, the way you treat it determines how it treats you in return. Every time you choose what feels good in the moment over what builds you in the long run, you're sending time a message: I don't respect you. And time, like any sacred force, responds in kind. It starts to work against you. Days feel shorter. Opportunities slip by unnoticed. You feel perpetually late, perpetually behind, even when the clock says you're on schedule. That's not a trick of perception. It's the natural consequence of a broken relationship with time. But when you realign, when you begin to honor time as the rare and irreplaceable currency of your life, everything changes. Your mornings stop being a mad rush. They become rituals. Your days stop feeling like reactions to endless demands. They become deliberate, steady progressions towards something that matters. Discipline at its highest level isn't about willpower or force, it's about rhythm. It's about creating a sacred cadence between the man you are today and the man you re-becoming. In that rhythm, the small daily choices that once felt like chores begin to feel like vows you're keeping. You wake up not because you must, but because you get to meet your oath again. You train not to punish yourself, but to remember yourself. You choose the harder path in the moment because it's the one that keeps you aligned with your future. And when your life begins to echo this truth, time no longer feels like an enemy to outrun. It becomes an ally that carries you forward. To step fully into discipline, you must be willing to let a part of yourself die. Not the whole of who you are, just the version that keeps breaking its own word. The one who says someday and never means it. The one who hides behind potential because becoming proof would mean there's no more place to hide. This version of you isn't evil. He isn't your enemy. In fact, he's been protecting you in his own way, shielding you from the sting of failure, from the pain of rejection, from the possibility of trying and still falling short. But his role is complete. You cannot carry him into the life you want to build. And so you have to bury him, not with anger, not with guilt, but with honor. Thank him for the years he kept you safe. Acknowledge that without him, you might not have made it this far. But understand that his season is over. In his place, you must allow a different identity to take root. One that thrives in clarity, not chaos. One that values structure as armor, not as a cage. This is the moment where discipline stops being an abstract concept and becomes an act of self-respect. The more unpredictable and unstable the world becomes, the more valuable a calm, structured man is. And if you choose, you can be that man. Not next Monday. Not after one more breakdown. Now, this breath, this choice, this moment, it's your initiation. Because the man you are destined to be will not appear someday. He is built, brick by brick, in the daily rituals you choose to honor today. Before you can live as the disciplined man you were meant to be, you must forgive yourself for all the years you weren't. This is where so many men stumble. They try to build their new life on a foundation of regret, and the weight of that guilt eventually cracks it. Discipline cannot grow in a place where you're still punishing yourself for the past. Jung taught that wholeness doesn't come from adding more pieces to yourself. It comes from embracing every part you've been, even the ones you've tried to hide. That means you don't just accept the strong, focused, relentless parts of yourself. You also accept the weak, the distracted, the inconsistent parts. Not to glorify them, but to lead them, to unify them under one will. When your inner house is in order, there are no exiles left, only parts of you that are finally working together. In that unity, you stop chasing permission from the outside world. You stop performing discipline to prove something. You start living it quietly, steadily, because it reflects who you are at the deepest level. True sovereignty begins here. It's the moment you no longer need to be watched to be consistent. The moment you stop relying on bursts of motivation and instead live by a code. Sovereignty is not loud. It does not shout or demand to be seen. It walks into a room with a weight that is felt before it is heard. And when you embody that weight, you no longer fear losing discipline, because it has stopped being something you do and has become something you are. So now I'll leave you with a question that should echo in your mind long after this moment ends. What would your life look like if you stopped living as a reaction and started living as a declaration? Not what you hope to do, not what you'll get around to someday, but a life where every choice, every hour, every breath is proof that you are the man you said you would be. This is the vow you've been avoiding, and it's the one that changes everything. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need one more sign. You don't need to wait for the perfect morning, the right mood, or the next wave of motivation. Readiness is not the gateway, decision is. And the decision is made right now, not tomorrow. Because the man who waits for the right time will wait for the rest of his life. Carl Jung believed that wholeness isn't about escaping the parts of yourself you dislike. It's about leading them. Discipline is that leadership. It is the unshakable structure that allows every part of you to move in the same direction. And when that happens, you don't just feel powerful, you feel at peace. Because you're no longer in conflict with yourself. You're no longer breaking the promises that once hollowed you out from the inside. Return to your vow. Not later. Not when it's convenient. Now. Because the moment you keep your word to yourself, you'll never need to chase discipline again. It will live in you, not as a burden, but as proof. Proof that you finally remembered who you are and what you came here to do.